All right, let's talk about one of the weirdest stories in the entire history of the NFL. We're going to uncover a team that was there for one season and then, poof, just vanished. This is all about the NFL's honest-to-goodness ghost team, the 1931 Cleveland Indians. But here's the crazy part. What if I told you that this team, even though it disappeared, actually left behind a legacy that shaped two of today's NFL cities? I know it sounds totally made up, but it's a real story just buried deep, deep in the league's archives. So yeah, let's meet this team that time basically forgot. We're talking 1931, right in the middle of the Great Depression, and the NFL puts a team on the field called the Cleveland Indians. But trust me, this was not your typical franchise. And what makes them so weird is how they even started. So get this. The team was actually owned and run by the NFL itself. Yeah, the league office. They were basically just using the franchise spot from another team that had already gone belly up, the Orange/Newark Tornadoes. The whole plan was to just, keep the seat warm in Cleveland until they could find a real owner. It was basically a placeholder, a ghost team right from the get-go.
Which begs the question, right? Why Cleveland? Why would the league take on this huge risk, running its own team smack in the middle of a massive economic crisis? Well, the answer had nothing to do with the team itself. Nope. It was all about the building they were going to play in.
Okay, to really get how big of a gamble this was, you gotta picture the NFL back in 1931. I mean, it was a gritty, small-time operation. Most teams were playing in these little stadiums, lucky to get a few thousand fans in the stands. But Cleveland had something totally different. Something absolutely massive. The city had just finished building this brand new, top-of-the-line stadium. Yeah, just let that number sink in for a second. 83,000 seats. That wasn't just big, it was monstrous for the time. It was by far the largest stadium in the entire league, like a total cathedral of sports in an era of tiny little ballparks. The NFL saw this place and thought, okay, this is it. This is our chance to go big time. But, having a massive stadium is one thing. Actually filling it with paying customers, especially during the Great Depression, well, that's a whole other story. The league's huge ambition was about to get a serious reality check. And oof, this right here shows you just how badly that gamble went. You've got this stadium that holds 83,000 people, and for their very first home game, only 2,000 fans actually showed up. 2,000. I mean, they were basically playing in an empty cavern. That big dream of a Cleveland powerhouse? Yeah, it was dead on arrival. And it's not like their play on the field was winning anyone over either. They finished this season with a pretty awful record, just 2 wins and 8 losses. They landed in 8th place. So yeah, they weren't just failing to sell tickets, they were failing to win games too. So surprise, surprise, at the end of that one season, the team folded. And you think, okay, that's the end of the story, right? A failed experiment, just a footnote in history. But this is where things get really, really interesting. The team itself died, but its spirit, or, well, its franchise spot, it just wouldn't go away. And this is the key to the whole thing. The league still owned the rights to that franchise spot. Remember, it was originally the Tornadoes spot, then temporarily the Indians. And in a professional league, an official franchise spot, well, that's a really valuable piece of paper. So you can see how this all played out. First, the NFL grabs the rights from the dead and gone Tornadoes. Step 2, they operate it for that 1 year as the Cleveland Indians. Then, after that whole Cleveland thing blew up in their face, they turned around and sold that exact same franchise spot to a guy named George Preston Marshall, and he had a plan to start a new team up in Boston. And that team that Marshall started, his new Boston team, was first called the Braves, then the Redskins. Eventually, they packed up and moved to Washington, D.C., and today, we know them as the Washington Commanders. That's right. The DNA of this one-year ghost team is alive and well in today's NFL.
But wait, that's not even the only legacy. During that single 1931 season, the Indians played an exhibition game in Buffalo, which was a city that had just lost its own NFL team a couple years earlier. Well, that one game was a huge hit. So much so that it started this tradition of the NFL playing neutral site games in Buffalo for the next 29 years. It basically kept pro football's pulse alive in that city, right up until the Buffalo Bills were born.
Okay, now, if you're a big football history buff, you might be thinking, hold on a second, weren't there other Cleveland Indians football teams? And you are absolutely right. Cleveland's early football history can get, well, a little messy. So let's untangle this. Here's the official word from the NFL, and it's actually pretty simple. Even though 3 different teams use the name Cleveland Indians, the league sees them as 3 totally separate, completely unrelated franchises. So our ghost team from 1931, officially, it has 0 connection to those other 2.
And this timeline really helps lay it all out. You can see the first Indians team popped up in 21, then another one in 23. Then there's our ghost team in 1931. It really wasn't until years later that you got the more permanent teams, like the Cleveland Rams, and of course the legendary Cleveland Browns, who finally brought some stability to pro football in that city.
So what's the big takeaway here? I mean, let's be honest, the 1931 Cleveland Indians were a total failure. A horrible record, nobody in the stands, they lasted 1 year. And yet, from the ashes of that failure, you get the franchise DNA of the Washington Commanders and the spark that kept football going in Buffalo. It's just a wild example of how sometimes the biggest flops can have these strange, hidden, and totally lasting impacts. It really makes you think, though, doesn't it? For every famous team we all know and love, for every legendary player, you just have to wonder, how many other ghost teams, how many other forgotten stories just like this one, are buried down in the foundations of the sports leagues we follow every single day?